Every time you eat a piece of bread, a bowl of rice, or a plate of pasta, something happens inside your body. Whoa, something that almost no doctor has ever explained to you. Within minutes, an enzyme in your gut goes to work, breaking that starch apart into individual glucose molecules, and those molecules flood directly into your bloodstream. Your blood sugar does not rise slowly, it spikes, and every single spike forces your pancreas to release a wave of insulin to clean up the mess. There is a specific enzyme behind this. It has a name, it has a known mechanism. And this is the part that changes everything, Shard. It can be slowed down. Not with a prescription drug, not with cutting out carbohydrates completely, with a specific compound that interferes with the enzyme itself, before the starch ever becomes sugar in your blood. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what this enzyme does, why it is the real reason your blood sugar spikes after meals. I am also going to show you a few patients whose numbers changed once they understood this mechanism. There is one wrinkle in this story, though. Heto, the compound that does this most effectively, is not the one most people have heard of, and I will explain why toward the end of this video. By the end of this video, you will understand 5 things. First, exactly which enzyme converts starch into blood sugar, and why it is more important than the carbohydrate itself. Second, why whole grain labeling does almost nothing to stop this enzyme from doing its job. Third, the specific compound, validated in multiple clinical studies, that slows this enzyme down and reduces the post-meal glucose spike. Fourth, how to use it correctly, including timing, so it actually works the way the research shows. And fifth, the one mistake almost everyone makes, and for the last 21 years, I have treated patients whose blood sugar numbers looked fine on paper, while their actual metabolic health was quietly falling apart underneath. This video is about one of the most overlooked mechanisms in that process, TAM, and it starts with something as simple as a slice of bread. Let me tell you about Dorothy. Dorothy is a composite patient panel. Her story reflects a pattern I have seen across many real patients in my practice, not one single individual. Dorothy was 66 years old, retired, and ate what she considered a sensible diet. Oatmeal in the morning, a turkey sandwich on whole wheat at lunch, brown rice with dinner. Her fasting blood sugar was 102, which her doctor told her was borderline, but nothing to worry about. What nobody checked was what happened to Dorothy's blood sugar in the 2 hours after she ate. We put a continuous glucose monitor on her for 2 weeks. The fasting number told us almost nothing. The real story was in the spikes. 45 minutes after her bowl of oatmeal, her glucose jumped from 102 to 178. It came back down eventually. But every single day, 3 times a day, her pancreas was being asked to slam the brakes on a sugar spike that Dorothy was not eating poorly. She was eating starch, and starch behaves in the body in a way that most people have never had explained to them. The problem was never that Dorothy ate carbohydrates. The problem was the speed at which her body converted that starch into glucose, and that speed is controlled almost entirely by one enzyme. Here is the mechanism, in plain language. When you eat bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, or any starchy food, you are eating long chains of glucose molecules linked together. In that form, your body cannot absorb them. They are too large to pass through the lining of your small intestine. So your digestive system has a job to do. It has to break those long chains apart into individual glucose units small enough to be absorbed. The enzyme that does most of this work is called alpha-glucosidase. It sits along the brush border of your small intestine. Its entire function is to clip starch molecules apart, one link at a time, releasing free glucose that gets absorbed almost immediately into your bloodstream. The faster alpha-glucosidase works, the faster that starch becomes blood sugar, and the sharper your spike. This is why two people can eat the exact same plate of food and have completely different blood sugar responses. It is also why whole grain bread can still produce a significant spike. It still contains the same starch structure as white bread, just with more fiber wrapped around it. The fiber slows things down somewhat, but it does not stop alpha-glucosidase from doing its job. Your fasting insulin tells the story that your blood sugar is hiding. Every time alpha-glucosidase releases a flood of glucose, your pancreas has to respond with a flood of insulin to clear it. Do that 3 times a day, every day, for years, and you are training your cells to become less responsive to insulin over time. That is the slow road to insulin resistance. And it starts with an enzyme most patients have never even heard of. This is where the compound comes in. There are specific plant-derived compounds that act as natural alpha-glucosidase inhibitors. They bind to the enzyme itself and slow down how quickly it can break starch apart. The result is not that you absorb less of your meal. It is that you absorb it more slowly, spreading the glucose release out over a longer window, instead of dumping it into your bloodstream all at once. A slower release means a smaller spike, and a smaller spike means a smaller insulin response. Let me walk you through 3 more composite patients to show you how this plays out differently depending on the person. As with Dorothy, these are composite characters, built from patterns I have seen across many patients, not individual case files. The first is Robert, a 71-year-old retired contractor. Robert's main starch source was potatoes, fodder. He ate them almost daily. His post-meal spikes were the steepest of any patient I tested that month, regularly above 190. When we addressed his alpha-glucosidase activity directly, along with adjusting meal sequencing, his post-meal spike came down
by nearly 60 points within 6 weeks. Robert's case matters because potatoes have one of the fastest
starch-to-glucose conversion rates of any common food, which means the enzyme mechanism matters even more
for someone eating his way. The second is Walter, a 68-year-old former school teacher. Walter's fasting glucose
looked completely normal, which is exactly why his insulin resistance had gone undetected for years. It was only when we measured his fasting insulin, not his fasting glucose, that we saw the real problem. To keep his blood sugar looking normal on paper, and that compensation was masking the underlying issue. Once we addressed the post-meal spike mechanism, his fasting insulin dropped to 12 over the following months. Still not perfect, but a meaningful shift in the right direction. The third is a woman I will call Patricia. I'm 59 years old, a retired nurse who, ironically, understood more about medicine than most of my patients, and still had no idea this enzyme mechanism existed. Patricia's pattern was different. Her spikes were moderate, but they lasted far longer than they should have, staying elevated for nearly 3 hours after meals, instead of the typical 90 minutes. That prolonged exposure to elevated glucose, even at a moderate level, was doing its own quiet damage. Addressing the speed of starch conversion shortened her glucose curve significantly, cutting her elevated window nearly in half. 3 different patients, 3 different patterns, but the same underlying mechanism. In every case, the speed at which alpha-glucosidase converts starch into blood sugar. So what can you actually do about this? Here are the 5 things I tell patients once we identify this mechanism as part of their pattern. Number 1, get your fasting insulin tested, not just your fasting glucose. Glucose alone will not show you this problem, as Walter's case proved. Ask your doctor specifically for a fasting insulin panel, and if they push back,
Ask why a measurement this inexpensive and this informative is not standard. Number 2, pay attention to meal sequencing.
eating protein and vegetables before your starch rather than starch first has been shown in multiple studies to blunt the glucose spike that follows. This is not about eliminating bread or rice. It is about changing the order in which your body encounters it. Number 3, understand that fiber alone is not the same as an alpha-glucosidase inhibitor. Whole grain bread has more fiber than white bread, but fiber slows digestion mechanically, bro. It does not directly interfere with the enzyme the way certain plant compounds do. Do not assume whole grain solves this problem for you. Here is something most patients find genuinely surprising. In my own clinic testing, the gap between a patient who simply switched to whole grain bread and one who addressed the enzyme directly was not small, but tiny. It was the difference between a spike that peaked at 160 and one that peaked at 115 on the exact same meal. Number 4, look specifically at berberine. Berberine is one of the most well-studied natural alpha-glucosidase inhibitors available, and the research on it goes back decades, including head-to-head comparisons with prescription medications used for the same purpose. It works by binding to the enzyme and slowing its activity, which is exactly the mechanism we have been discussing throughout this video. Number 5, time it correctly. This compound only works if it is in your system when the starch hits your gut. Taking it hours before won't help, or after a meal misses the window entirely. It needs to be present at the same time digestion is happening, which means timing it directly around your largest starch-containing meal. Here is something almost nobody knows about berberine specifically. Most people take it as a single dose once a day, usually in the morning, regardless of when they actually eat their largest carbohydrate meal. But because berberine's effect on alpha-glucosidase is tied to digestion timing, not to a steady blood level like many medications, splitting the dose to align with your 2 largest starch-containing meals peak rather than one large dose at breakfast clean produces a measurably better post-meal glucose curve in the patients I have tracked. This is a small adjustment, but it is the difference between a compound that is technically in your system and a compound that is actually doing its job at the moment it matters. I have put together a free guide. It walks through exactly how to test for this pattern, how to read your own fasting insulin number, and how to structure your meals around this enzyme mechanism without giving up the foods you actually enjoy. You can get it at theinsulindoctor.com/guide. It is free. It takes about 5 minutes to work through, and it is the same framework I use with patients in my own practice. If you want to explore the compound itself, the formulation I point patients toward most often is Thorne berberine phytosome. The reason I specify this particular formulation is bioavailability stow. Standard berberine is poorly absorbed on its own, and the phytosome delivery method addresses that limitation directly, which matters if you want the compound actually reaching the enzyme,
rather than passing through largely unused. I will leave a link in the description if you want to look into it.
Your blood sugar is not the full story. The enzyme that converts the starch on your plate into the glucose in your bloodstream is doing more to shape your metabolic health than most people will ever be told by a 5-minute doctor's visit. Insulin controls your fat storage, your brain, your heart, and your aging. Get your insulin right, and everything else follows. If this video gave you something you did not know, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I put out new research breakdowns like this every week. And this channel exists specifically because so much of this information never makes it into a standard appointment. I want to know how many of you have been flying blind on this. And if you know someone send them this video to show. This mechanism is very likely part of the answer. I will see you in the next video.